Hi, before we find out what happens next, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to the channel. It takes a second and really help us grow. Out to the story.
The applause echoed in the town hall, polite but genuine. Another plaque, another speech, another reminder that the Morgans were, as the mayor put it, a cornerstone of our community. I clapped along, smile practiced, standing beside Richard and Janet as they posed for photos. The camera flash caught the gold lettering on the award, Outstanding Civic Contributors. Richard draped an arm over my shoulder as we stepped down from the dais. "Good turnout," he said, low enough that only I heard. "Yeah," I replied. "You're part of this, Callie. You always have been. Don't forget that." I didn't answer. At the reception, neighbors shook our hands, offered congratulations, shared stories about the Morgans' generosity, sponsoring the Little League team, donating to the library, hosting holiday food drives. But I watched the way people's eyes shifted when Richard spoke, how they nodded a little too eagerly, how no one questioned the polished version of us. Later, in the car, the mood shifted, as it always did. "Did you see Doyle there?" Richard asked, starting the engine. Janet sniffed. Bold of him to show up after all his talk of being wronged. That man was given every chance and squandered it. I stared out the window. Maybe he just wanted to be part of the community. Richard chuckled. "We are the community, Callie. Don't start softening for people who couldn't keep up. You know better than that." Janet reached over, squeezing my hand. "We're Morgans. We look after our own." And I nodded, because that was what I was supposed to do. But the ache in my chest said something else. At home, the plaques lined the walls of Richard's study. Awards for civic service, framed letters of thanks, news clippings with headlines like "Morgan Family, Model of Small-Town Success." I stood in the doorway, watching him sort through mail at his desk. "You should be proud," Richard said without looking up. "Not every family earns what we have. Not every family holds it together." "I am proud," I said, though the words tasted hollow. Janet appeared with 2 mugs of tea, setting one by Richard's elbow. "I hope you're not letting today's nonsense with Doyle cloud your mind," she said to me. I wasn't. "He had his chance," Richard added, glancing up. "We offered him fair terms. If he couldn't manage, that's on him. We don't owe him anything." I hesitated. What if it wasn't fair? Richard's jaw tightened. "Fair is what we say it is. We built this town up. We provided jobs, housing, stability. People forget that when they start feeling jealous." Janet nodded. "You're kind, Callie, but you can't let misplaced guilt make you weak. Compassion's a fine thing, as long as it doesn't make you disloyal." I didn't argue, not out loud. But later, in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the rows of polished frames and certificates I'd grown up with. And for the first time, I wondered how many of them had been built on someone else's loss. It started with a key. I found it while dusting the study. An old brass key wedged in the corner of a drawer, attached to a faded tag that read, "West End Storage." I held it up to the light, curious. I'd never heard of it, and in our house, everything had a place, a label, a purpose. "What's that?" Dad's voice came from behind me, easy but edged with something sharper. "Just cleaning up," I said, slipping the key into my pocket. He crossed the room, peered into the drawer, then at me. "No need to dig through old junk, Callie. Let the past stay where it belongs." I smiled, nodded. "Sure, Dad," but I couldn't let it go. The next morning, while Mom and Dad were at a community fundraiser, I drove across town. The storage facility was plain, forgettable, the kind of place no one notices. The clerk barely glanced at the key before leading me to a dusty unit. My hands trembled as I slid open the door. Inside, stacks of boxes, folders, old file cabinets. I opened a box at random. Deeds, loan papers, contracts. Names I recognized. Doyle, Ramos, Nguyen, people I'd grown up seeing at town events, people who no longer owned the homes I'd once visited. I pulled out a folder labeled Morgan Family Trust. My heart pounded as I skimmed the pages. My trust. The one my grandparents left for my future, drained, redirected. Into businesses, properties, deals that had nothing to do with me. The deals were ruthless. Properties bought for pennies on the dollar when their owners were desperate. Notes about cleaning title on land that should have been ours only if you ignored how we got it. I sat down on a crate, breath shallow. Mom and Dad had always said we were the kind of family that gave back, the kind that worked hard, earned everything. But what I held in my hands told a different story. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of it. I spent the next week picking at the edges of the truth, like a thread you can't stop pulling. Every spare hour, I returned to the storage unit, working through the boxes one by one. The deeper I went, the worse it got. There were letters, families begging for extensions on mortgages we'd acquired, tenants pleading for more time before eviction notices went out, notes in Dad's handwriting, "Don't engage, hold firm." Receipts for renovations to properties flipped within months, profits pocketed, people displaced, and always, woven through it all, were references to my trust, my future, cashed in to fuel the machine. At home, the walls seemed to close in with every award and framed certificate that stared back at me. One evening, over dinner, Mom poured tea with that same polished smile she wore at every fundraiser. "You've been quiet lately, honey. Everything all right?" "Yeah, just thinking." Dad set down his fork. "About what?" "About Doyle. About the other families who lost their homes." Dad's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "We didn't take anything that wasn't offered. People make choices, Callie. We just had the sense to take opportunities others didn't." Mom reached for my hand. "You're one of us. You know that. Compassion's a lovely trait, but don't let it blind you to loyalty." I said nothing. But inside, the last threads of the story I'd been raised on were snapping, one by one. I stopped attending the endless charity luncheons where Mom would beam at the crowd, where Dad would shake hands and remind everyone what the Morgans had given back to the town. "We missed you today," Mom said one evening, stirring sugar into her tea. Her tone was light, but the edge was there. "Needed some quiet," I replied. Dad glanced up from the paper. "Your name's on all this too, Callie. When you skip out, it reflects on the family. On all of us." I didn't answer. Instead, I spent my time at the library, poring over property records. I traced every house, every piece of land we'd acquired. The ones I'd been told were family holdings forever. Each one had a paper trail that told a different story. And when I saw Mr. Doyle at the grocery store, thinner than I remembered, shoulders stooped, I approached him. "Mr. Doyle." He turned, wary at first, then softened. "Callie Morgan. Haven't seen you in a while." "I'm sorry about everything," I said quietly. His smile was sad. "Not your doing, kid." But I knew better. At home, I began photographing the documents I'd found, storing them on a hidden drive. A quiet insurance, a way to keep the truth close, even if I wasn't ready to act. One night, Dad caught me lingering in the study, staring at the wall of plaques. "Lot of history there," he said, coming up beside me. "Yeah," I said, "a lot to think about." He clapped me on the back. "Don't overthink it, Callie. We're the good guys." But as I looked at the polished frames, all I could see were the names missing from them, the people we'd stepped over to hang them there. And I knew, small as they were, my first steps away had begun. The letter came on a Wednesday, heavy cream paper tucked into a plain envelope. Notice of trust activation. I read it twice, heart pounding. My grandparents' trust, the one I'd assumed long empty, had reached its final clause. I was now sole executor of the remaining Morgan estate properties tied to it. At dinner, I tried to keep my voice steady. "I got a notice about the trust today." Dad set down his glass. "Oh?" Mom's smile froze. "How wonderful. We'll go over it together, of course." "I don't think that's how it works," I said quietly. "It's in my name now. I'm responsible." Dad's jaw tightened. "We've managed those properties for years. We know what's best." "I appreciate that," I said, keeping my tone calm. "But I need to review everything, myself." Mom reached for my hand. "Callie, honey, we're a family. There's no myself in this." But there was. Over the next days, I combed through the records again. Not in secret this time, but as owner. I saw every deal, every name, every hidden cost of the legacy I'd been taught to revere. And I knew what I had to do. When I told them my plan, that I was reviewing the properties, speaking to former owners, considering reparations, the silence at the table was deafening. Dad's voice, when it came, was low, dangerous. "You're betraying us." "No," I said. "I'm finally honoring what was meant to be ours, without taking from others to do it." Mom's eyes shone with unshed tears, but she didn't speak, and I didn't back down. I kept my meetings private, early mornings, quiet afternoons when Mom and Dad were occupied with charity boards or business calls. I visited the properties, walked their cracked sidewalks, met the people who lived there now. Some had no idea the Morgans once held the deeds. Others remembered all too well. "I was a month behind on rent when your family bought the building," said Mrs. Ramos, her voice steady but sad. "Next thing I knew, we were out. Said it was just business." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it with my whole heart. "It's done," she said, shrugging. But I saw the hurt that hadn't faded. At home, I drafted letters in my room, offers of repayment where I could, forgiveness of debts, quiet efforts to set things right. I didn't announce it. I didn't need applause. The first time I signed a check, I stared at my name on the line and felt, for the first time, like it truly belonged to me. Dad sensed the shift. "You've been busy," he said one evening, studying me over his glass of wine, "just trying to do the right thing." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The right thing? Or the thing that makes you feel better about yourself?" "The thing that makes things right," I said. Mom sighed. "Don't let guilt ruin what we've built, Callie. Other families wouldn't even consider doing what you're doing. We're generous. We always have been." But I'd stopped listening, because the plan was already in motion, and no one could stop it now. I started with Doyle. He wasn't hard to find. He still lived in town, in a modest apartment above the hardware store. When I knocked, he answered slowly, cautious, as if expecting bad news. "Callie Morgan," he said, surprise flickering across his face. "Hi, Mr. Doyle. Do you have a minute?" He stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was neat but worn, the kind of place that held pride despite years of struggle. I sat across from him at the small kitchen table and laid out the envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A check," I said. "Not everything you lost. I know I can't do that. But it's a start." His brows drew together. "Why now?" "Because it's the right thing." He picked up the envelope but didn't open it. "Your dad know you're here?" "No," I said. "And it doesn't matter." For a long moment Doyle said nothing. Then he set the envelope down and looked me in the eye. "You're a good one," he said quietly. "Always wondered if you'd see it for what it was." I left before he could say more, not because I didn't want to hear it, but because the weight of what I'd done was sinking in. At home, I found Dad in the study, going over papers. He looked up as I entered. "You've been out." "I have." "Running errands?" "Setting things right." His smile was thin, forced. "You'll see, Callie. People will take what you give and ask for more. They always do." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll know I did my part." It started with glances. At the market, at the cafe, at the post office, people looked at me differently. Not with the usual polite nods reserved for a Morgan, but with something warmer. Mrs. Ramos stopped me by the produce stand. "I heard what you did for Doyle," she said. "That was kind." "I just did what I could," I said, embarrassed by the attention. She squeezed my hand. "Sometimes that's everything." Word spread the way it always does in small towns. Not through headlines or speeches, but through quiet conversations, the kind that mattered more. Dad noticed. "People have been talking," he said one evening, setting down his paper. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "About you. About how generous you've been." His voice was careful, measured. "You're turning our name into something else." "Something honest?" His mouth tightened. "Something weak." Mom stepped in, always the peacemaker. "Callie, honey, they'll take advantage. You'll see. People don't respect weakness. They use it." "I'm not trying to be respected," I said. "I'm trying to do what's right." And I meant it. At night, I slept lighter. During the day, I walked through town without the invisible armor I'd worn for so long. because the community was seeing not what I came from, but what I chose to be. I started small. A community garden on a lot we still owned. Land that once belonged to a family, driven out in a deal I'd found buried in those files. I didn't announce it. No ribbon cutting, no press. Just a sign that read, "For everyone." At first, people came cautiously. A few kids, a couple of neighbors, curious. Then they stayed. They planted, they watered, they worked. I donated to the library fund, not with a big check and a plaque, just quietly, to replace the books I knew we'd promised years ago, but never delivered. At the diner one afternoon, the owner came over. "Heard about the garden," he said, sliding me a coffee on the house. "It's good, what you're doing." "Thanks," I said, a little startled. "You're changing things," he added. "In the right way." At home, Mom watched me from the kitchen window as I came back from a day at the lot. "You're working hard," she said, trying for a gentle tone. "It feels good," I said. She hesitated. "You don't have to prove anything, Callie. You've always made us proud." "I'm not trying to prove anything, Mom. I'm just trying to build something real." Dad stayed silent these days, watching from the study, papers untouched. I think he didn't know what to say anymore. And that was fine, because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for his approval. I was building something that didn't need it. The garden thrived that summer. What started as a patch of tired soil became rows of vegetables, bursts of color from wildflowers, and laughter from kids who stopped by after school. I walked the paths in the early mornings, breathing in the scent of basil and earth, listening to the quiet hum of bees. No plaques bore my name. No speeches were given. That was how I wanted it. At the library, the new books arrived, and I watched as kids pulled them from the shelves, settling into corners to read. No one knew who'd made it happen. That felt right, too. One afternoon, Mom found me at the garden, a basket of fresh tomatoes in my hands. "You're happy here," she said, more statement than question. "I am," I said. She nodded, looking out over the rows of plants. "Your dad doesn't understand. Maybe I don't either. But I can see you're at peace." "I am," I repeated. Later, as I walked home, I passed people I'd known all my life. They nodded, smiled, not at Callie Morgan, the daughter of Richard and Janet, but at me. And that night, I stood in my room, staring at the bare wall where the plaques used to hang. Polished things, once meant to prove our worth. I'd taken them down weeks ago, but only now did I notice the shadow outlines they'd left behind. Ghosts of praise, of borrowed pride. I touched the wall gently, almost expecting it to feel different. But it was just drywall, empty and honest. For the first time I realized I didn't need the space filled again, because legacy isn't what you frame or polish. It's what you choose to carry, and what you choose, finally, to let go.